Our story takes place in Moscow, 1997. Inside a cramped television studio, colorful puppet heads hang from hooks like strange trophies. Scripts scatter across editing tables, covered in Cyrillic text and cheerful illustrations. A life-size Elmo costume slumps in the corner, its permanent smile now oddly menacing in the fluorescent light. Then the boots. Heavy military boots echoing down hallways as armed soldiers storm through the building, confiscating everything. Puppets, scripts, props, even that oversized Elmo. What crime had been committed here? What dangerous propaganda required such dramatic intervention? That crime? Was teaching children to be kind. The propaganda was diversity and critical thinking, but by this point in Moscow television, the stakes had escalated far beyond cultural disputes. As executive producer Natasha Lance-Rogoff later wrote, she had been thrown into the surreal landscape of Moscow television where bombings, murders, and political unrest were near daily events. During production of Ulitsa Sezam, the Russian version of Sesame Street, television executives collaborating on the show were being assassinated, quote, one after another. One key financier, Boris Berezovsky, barely survived a car bombing in 1994. This is the actual history of how puppets teaching basic human values became literally life-threatening to create. Oh, hello there, YouTube game Monsticker All-Star here, back at it again with another banger.
Step on it, Daddy!
So in part 1, we explored how 90s cartoons shaped my generation's values from the inside. Today, we're kind of flipping the script a little bit to examine how the outside world reacted to some of these supposedly innocent shows, and what those reactions reveal around society's profound anxieties around children's access to information. And I would say that my interest in this isn't just really academic. I mean, I am a biracial father raising 4 neurodivergent, multiracial children. I'm living with the ongoing effects of these cultural battles every day. And I don't know if I can ever change the world myself, but I do know that raising good kids creates a very tangible ripple effect that can actually extend far beyond my own family and influence. The lessons I absorbed from these 90s cartoons are now really indicative of how I try to parent and how I try to break previous generational cycles.
Everyone hates a message board miscreant, but now you can do something about it! Flame Wars, the next generation, tonight on 6 Ed World!
When Ulitsa Sezam launched in 1996 following the Soviet collapse, it was explicitly designed to teach democratic values to children in post-communist Russia. Funded partly by the U.S. Agency for International Development, the show featured Russian Muppets and storylines created to promote critical thinking, diversity, and environmental awareness, values that we now recognize from American children's programming. The production faced incredible obstacles, from cultural clashes with Russian puppeteers to that military raid on their offices. But what's most telling is how the show's reception changed with Russia's political direction. After broadcasting successfully for over a decade, Ulitsa Sezam was eventually taken off the air in 2010 when it lost support from Putin's people at the television networks. The same puppets teaching kindness and critical thinking became increasingly incompatible with Putin's vision for Russia. What had been embraced as educational during Russia's democratic opening became threatening as the country shifted towards authoritarianism. This wasn't happening in a vacuum. While Russian puppets were being silenced, American had already institutionalized certain values through legislation. The 1990 Children's Television Act mandated educational content and restricted commercialization, creating a unique regulatory environment where networks were legally required to prioritize quote-unquote pro-social messaging over pure profit. And we all know how that turned out. So what's really fascinating fascinating about how quickly the definition of appropriate children's programming shifts based on who holds power. The censorship impulse isn't politically neutral. It reveals what different groups see as threatening. Conservatives typically fear content that challenges traditional authority, but progressives tend to more so worry about content that causes measurable harm to vulnerable people. These aren't the same concern wearing different hats. The real lesson isn't that we need more government-mandated content of any particular type, it's that we should question any system where centralized authorities determine what children can see and learn, regardless of which political faction controls those systems at any given time. As we examine how adults worldwide panicked over everything from playground trading cards to cartoon therapy sessions, consider this paradox. The very shows teaching children to question authority existed because one authority temporarily imposed its will on another. To me, this tension reveals something very fundamental about how adults attempt to control children's access to information, and why children's cartoons became unexpected battlegrounds in a very larger cultural conflict that continues to this day. The story of Ulitsa Sezam reveals more than just Russian politics. It demonstrates how children's programming became a political battleground regardless of international boundaries. Following the Soviet Union's collapse in 1991, the Children's Television Workshop saw an opportunity to help shape a new generation of Russian citizens. They recruited American journalist Natasha Lance Rogoff to produce a Russian version of Sesame Street that would teach democratic values while respecting Russian culture. The production assembled 279 Russians to develop and produce the series with a budget of about $6 million. But from the beginning, creating fuzzy puppets teaching friendship proved surprisingly contentious. Russian puppeteers that were trained in their own rich theatrical traditions resisted the American style of puppetry. They proposed darker, more complex material that the American producers rejected as too frightening or inappropriate for the educational curriculum. What's fascinating is how these cultural clashes mirrored broader tensions about Western influence in post-Soviet Russia. Were these puppets bringing universal values or imposing American cultural hegemony? The question wasn't academic, it manifested in everything from puppet design to storyline development. Despite these challenges, Ulitsa Sezam premiered in October of 1996, featuring distinctly Russian characters. Zeleboba, a 9-foot blue tree spirit who could smell music, Businka, a pink monster who found joy in everything, and Kubik, an orange practical problem solver. The show was set in a Russian courtyard surrounded by a mixture of traditional, rural, and urban architecture, creating a recognizably Russian environment for these universal values. The show's educational goals included teaching children about living in a democratic and diverse society while still instilling pride in Russian culture and traditions, and also creating a supportive environment where children felt secure. These goals paralleled American children's programming of the era, revealing how similar values were being promoted through children's media across previously opposed political systems. Ulitsa Sezam reached millions of families on Russia's two largest television networks. But as Putin consolidated power and Russia's brief democratic opening began closing, the show's message became increasingly at odds with the government's direction. The content never changed, it was just the political tolerance for it that did. The same puppets teaching kindness, diversity, and critical thinking became threatening precisely because these values challenged an increasingly authoritarian system. I think that this pattern of initial acceptance followed by rejection really reveals something profound about this children's programming as a whole. What we're really discussing when we panic over children's media isn't really entertainment, but our competing visions for the future. And in that conversation, the stakes are whether children get to participate in shaping those visions or simply absorbing approved messages.
Sarah?
She won't answer you. Or she can't. This is the way it's been since she started smoking pot.
So do you remember that episode of Recess, the one titled Economics of Recess, where the playground developed its own currency system using monster stickers? Now, this wasn't just clever storytelling, it really eerily mirrored real-world events happening on playgrounds across America. The episode follows TJ as he returns from being sick to discover that the playground has developed a currency system using Mon stickers. Everything from drinking water to playing with balls now required payment.
2 stickers, please.
It's water. You can't charge for water.
2 stickers.
But I don't have any stupid stickers.
Then you and I have a problem.
No, you don't. No problem at all.
Through hard work and clever investments, TJ rises from poverty to become the richest kid on the playground, eventually controlling 80% of the wealth before the economy collapses and shifts to a new currency. What makes this episode remarkable is how sophisticated its economic commentary is. It presents a microcosm of capitalism with monopolies, wealth inequality, labor exploitation, and market crashes. When viewed through the lens of the Children's Television Act, which mandated educational content, we can see how this show fulfills this requirement, while simultaneously offering a critique of unchecked economic power. And I apologize that I'm going to be generalizing here a little bit in this next example, but I'm going to consider this a canon event for pretty much all millennials. So you know what? Let's go. At precisely the same time that this episode aired, schools nationwide were banning Pokémon cards for creating similar playground economies. By 1999, most schools had implemented policies restricting card trading, with administrators citing concerns about trades leading to conflicts and younger kids being manipulated by older ones, and the omnipotent label of distractions. As every school principal put it while holding up a holographic Charizard in front of the student body, these cards were causing conflicts between students and creating playground economies outside adult control. But as I stated, by the turn of the new millennium, schools across America basically banned anything and everything Pokemon, with going so far as to even call the trading card game essentially gateway gambling. And I mean, like, all right, I'm going to go off on a rant here. I don't disagree with trading card games being essentially considered gambling, but I think the core difference here is that you can actually get a return on your investment with trading cards, at least if you're, smart about which ones that you're holding on to and, a little bit of luck. But with gambling, it's either all or nothing. You either lose all your money or you come back with about the same amount of money or more. I feel like it's very much a zero-sum game. So that's why I am completely fine with, my kids playing Lorcana than I would them doing any other type of loot box nonsense. There's at least a little bit of a resale value that makes the chase worth it. Like, TJ really gives off like a Gordon Gekko, greed is good, very much a 90s, 80s Trumpian looking version of himself. So, maybe I'm just seeing things with my TDS, but here we are. What really happened on playgrounds was sophisticated learning disguised as play. Kids were developing negotiation skills, understanding supply and demand, experiencing inflation firsthand, and learning about investment risk in genuinely low-stakes environments. When problems arose, and they did, schools had an opportunity to teach economic justice, fair dealing, and protective oversight. Instead, they chose elimination and prohibition over education. And I feel like this is just kind of like a smaller micro version of how institutions sometimes respond when children's autonomous spaces become complex. Rather than helping kids navigate complexity, adults often find it easier to eliminate the complexity entirely. There's obviously a critical balance between protecting children from genuine harm and simply avoiding the work of teaching navigation skills. When my 5-year-old with Down syndrome shows interest in the same type of games as her 11-year-old sibling, I absolutely need to consider what is appropriate for her developmental level. But the solution isn't to ban games, it's to provide appropriate guidance and support. This pattern of choosing elimination over education continues today with much higher stakes. The current debates over social media reflect the same institutional impulse. When faced with genuine problems like cyberbullying, predatory behavior, and age-inappropriate content, the tendency is toward prohibition, but the fundamental challenge remains the same. How do you address real problems without throwing away valuable opportunities? The irony itself is striking. While federally mandated educational programs taught taught children about economic systems through shows like Recess, schools face the real playground trading problems with their scamming, exploitation of younger kids, unfair power dynamics, and they chose prohibition over education. And like, there's probably going to be a few of you saying like, we don't need to teach kids all this stuff. But I mean, have you seen today? I think that we kind of do. Like, this is once again, the whole point of my channel is me talking about all this stuff because I want my kids to be able to look at something and say, oh, that is more than likely AI. I want them to be able to look at a piece of text and be like, wow, this is really basic as hell. This is probably written by AI. I want them to be able to actually utilize research tools and learn how to actually deep dive on complex issues through metaphors. And this is why my kids are going to be getting scholarships and like some of y'all's aren't. You know, I'm just going to keep it 100 right there. Also, since we're about halfway through the video, I just wanted to say thank you so much for taking the time to watch this. Thank you for being the sponsor of my video. And if you want to sponsor me further, check out the YouTube memberships and the Patreon. Also, I really wanted to say thank you to my first ever patron, Hugo. I really appreciate your support. I have a couple dozen eggs. If you live in the Seattle metro area, come get some eggs. And if you join my Patreon and you live near me, I will give you free eggs. So you're making a return on your investment for me. So check it out. Okay, bye.
Get him out of here! He's got AIDS!
Captain Planet's A Formula for Hate episode from 1992 stands as one of the most groundbreaking moments in children's television. Featuring voice acting from Neil Patrick Harris and Elizabeth Taylor, it was the first episode in an American children's animated series to directly address the HIV and AIDS pandemic.
Nothing to say. It's all over.
Not the way I hear it.
Coach, I've got AIDS.
Wrong. You're HIV positive. Big difference. It could be years before you even get sick.
What makes this episode extraordinary wasn't just its existence, but its timing. Airing during peak AIDS panic when misconceptions about transmission were rampant, the episode directly challenged myths about casual contact spreading HIV at a time when many school districts had no formal HIV education. This episode wasn't just brave storytelling, it was providing children with factual information when many adults were spreading dangerous falsehoods.
Who's there?
Your worst nightmare. I'm ignorance. I'm fear. I'm hate.
When the villainous, verminous scum spreads lies about HIV transmission to isolate a high school basketball player, Captain Planet and the Planeteers respond with accurate information about how the virus is actually contracted. At a time when adults were propagating harmful myths to the point that families were being torched in their homes because of the fact that they had HIV positive children trying to attend school, a cartoon superhero provided children with more accurate health information than many parents or teachers. But I would say perhaps no episode better illustrates how cartoons challenged adult comfort zones than Hey Arnold's Helga on the Couch, a 1999 episode dedicated entirely to a child's therapy session. What today might seem unremarkable was revolutionary for its time, an animated children's show portraying therapy as normal, helpful, and even transformative. When Helga gets sent to the school psychologist, her father's immediate reaction encapsulates the era's attitude towards children's mental health. "We didn't have therapy when I was a kid," he complains, instructing her to not blab to some school shrink because we Patakis don't talk about things, sweep them under the rug. This wasn't just a cartoon character's opinion, it reflected mainstream American attitudes toward children's psychology in the 1990s. This episode portrayed Dr. Bliss as competent and compassionate while showing actual therapeutic techniques like play therapy and free association. When Helga reveals her deepest secrets, Dr. Bliss responds not with judgment but with understanding, telling her this kind of thing happens every day. What made this portrayal truly subversive wasn't just showing therapy, it was suggesting that children might have internal lives, complex emotions, and psychological needs independent of their their parents' awareness or approval. The episode implicitly challenged the widespread belief that children's emotional struggles weren't real enough to warrant professional intervention. And this episode really hits particularly home for me because I've lived through both sides of this cultural shift. When I was in the 6th grade, my parents were already divorced, but I was still having a lot of emotional issues with it. And because of that, I had to go to school counseling. I was getting into fights and stuff as a 6th grader. I know, I'm so cool. But because of how stigmatized therapy was in the 90s and early 2000s society, I experienced it more as a punishment than a help. While I tried to take its lessons to heart, it wasn't until I was an adult with kids that it all clicked and came full circle. Now my 11-year-old is turning 12 and is showing the same mood swings that I experienced at that age. I really want them to understand their emotions before those struggles affect them in the way that they affected me. Episodes like Helga on the Couch help illuminate why counseling could be valuable, not as punishment for bad behavior, but just as a normal resource for understanding complex feelings. The show modeled how therapy creates space for children to process emotions that might feel overwhelming or confusing or all-consuming on their own. The difference between my experience and theirs really illustrates exactly what these cartoons were fighting for. The idea that children deserve emotional support without shame or stigma attached to it. What felt punitive to me in the 90s and 2000s can feel empowering to them today, but only because some adults were willing to challenge prevailing attitudes throughout shows like Hey Arnold. The backlash to this episode was telling. Parental groups complained that it encouraged children to share family problems with outsiders, revealing that the real concern wasn't child welfare, but family privacy and parental authority. The idea that children might have confidential relationships with mental health professionals challenged fundamental assumptions about who controls children's access to support and information. Especially today, as lawmakers demand that schools notify parents if their children express any feelings of queerness or transgenderism. If I use the wrong terms, please let me know. I apologize. The message remains as threatening to certain worldviews as it is in 1999. The culture war over children's mental health services continues, with schools becoming battlegrounds over whether children deserve access to emotional support without mandatory parental notification. So the common thread through all of these examples isn't that they push specifically progressive values, but that they provided children with information and perspectives that challenged institutional control. Whether that came from parents, schools, or broader cultural forces, the backlash wasn't about political orientation, but about the fundamental threat that these shows pose to adults' authority over children's minds. But here's where the story gets really interesting. As adults grew increasingly uncomfortable with these challenges to authority, children's animation began to evolve in unexpected directions. The late 1990s and early 2000s saw an emergence of what we might call the weird cartoon boom. Shows that push boundaries not through explicit social commentary, but through increasingly surreal visual language and narrative structures. While shows like Recess and Hey Arnold challenge conventional thinking, they largely maintain traditional animation styles and storytelling approaches. But as networks evolved and creators gained more freedom, the visual language of children's animation began to transform. Shows like The Marvelous Misadventures of Flapjack emerged, where the values of questioning authority and exploring identity were expressed through increasingly unsettling visual metaphors and body horror.
I know what you want. String!
Oh.
That tight close-up of Dr. Barber saying surgery wasn't just random weirdness, it was part of a new visual vocabulary challenging what children's animation could look like. When conventional approaches to addressing complex themes faced resistance, creators found new ways to smuggle challenging ideas past adult oversight through deliberately bizarre aesthetics and surreal storytelling structures. And also, to be clear, I'm not arguing that government should mandate progressive messaging in children's media. If anything, these historical examples reveal the problem with letting any centralized authority, whether it be governments, corpos, or moral panic groups, dictate what children can or cannot see. The Children's Television Act had positive effects by creating a space for educational content, but it also represents a type of top-down control that's inherently problematic. When Putin's government silence Ulitsa Sezam or American conservatives target woke content, they're exercising the same regulatory power that created this programming in the first place, just different values and different goals. And what's really most disturbing in our current landscape isn't just the conservative moral panic over inappropriate content, but the growing liberal faith that regulatory solutions and corporate content moderation will somehow protect children better than critical thinking skills. Both positions fundamentally mistrust children's capacity to process information and to form their own values. The position that I'm advocating isn't that we need more government-mandated progressive content, is that we need to dismantle systems that concentrate control over information in the hands of the few, whether those few are politicians, corporate executives, or algorithm designers. The goal shouldn't be replacing conservative regulation with progressive regulation, but questioning the very premise that adults should tightly control what children see and learn. When my kids watch content that makes me uncomfortable, whether it's overly commercial, politically divergent from my personal views, or just simply weird, I don't reach for the remote or call for regulation. I sit down next to them and I ask them questions. What do you think about this? Does that seem fair to you? Why do you think that these 20-something-year-olds are playing Roblox for a living? This approach trusts children's inherent capacity for critical thinking rather than assuming that they're just passive vessels for whatever messaging comes their way. Also, the answer to that question is money. I'm not going to say which question, but I think you know.
Tomorrow, will you be playing Roblox Hide and Seek Extreme on stream? Hold on, what's that?
And I think that this is where the digital age has made parenting both more complex and more crucial. Previous generations could control information flow more easily. If you didn't want your kids exposed to certain ideas, you could control their books, TV shows, and social circles. Digital spaces make that control kind of nearly impossible, forcing parents to rely more on building internal decision-making capabilities rather than external boundary setting. The question becomes, how do you prepare children to navigate information in social spaces that you can't fully control? Like, what's at stake here goes beyond individual parenting decisions. When we systematically discourage children from questioning established systems, we're not just shaping individual minds, we're shaping the future of democratic participation itself. A society that teaches children to accept authority without question doesn't suddenly produce adults that are capable of thoughtful civic engagement. The cognitive habits that we cultivate in childhood become the intellectual tools we use as citizens. The 90s cartoons that I've discussed weren't valuable because they pushed specifically progressive values. They were valuable because they encouraged questioning established systems rather than accepting them as natural or inevitable. They didn't tell children what to think, they invited them to think for themselves. That's not a liberal or a conservative or progressive value. It's a fundamentally human one that threatens any system relying on unquestioning acceptance of authority. So, as I said in the beginning, as a parent of 4 neurodivergent, multiracial children, what makes this moment really unique is that, in my personal opinion, we are the first generation of parents who grew up absorbing these lessons about questioning authority, embracing diversity, and thinking critically, and now we're the adults making decisions about what our children see and learn. And I mean this in the sense that we're the first generation with like the proliferation of technology and the internet itself. We're not just analyzing these culture wars from the outside, we're living proof of their long-term effects. These shows that taught me to question simplistic narratives are now informing how I help kids navigate a media landscape that's exponentially more complex than anything that I have ever experienced. The difference is that I'm trying to be neither the censor nor the completely hands-off parent. Instead, I watch alongside my kids, using media as starting points for conversations and how they understand the world. That's the whole point of this channel. When my 11-year-old comes home talking about online discussions of representation, or my 9-year-old is asking why certain characters never get to be the hero, I recognize that they're engaging with the same questions that made adults nervous about the shows of my youth. The difference is that I'm encouraging their critical thinking rather than trying to shield them from it. The battles over children's media have become far more intense than anything we have seen in the 90s. What used to be disagreements over individual episodes have escalated into systematic attempts to control entire school curricula, library collections, and online spaces. The stakes feel higher because the tools for both surveillance and resistance have become more powerful. But the fundamental question remains the same. Who gets to decide what children are ready to know and when they're ready to know it? So, to many people, these historical examples might seem distant, but they've directly shaped how we think about children's media today. Perhaps the ultimate lesson from these cartoon culture wars isn't that children were never passive consumers of values, they were always active participants in making meaning from the stories they loved. The shows that shaped me didn't indoctrinate me into any particular ideology, they just gave me the frameworks to question the world around me. So I'd encourage you to think about your own childhood media consumption. Like, what shows shaped your worldview when you were younger? Leave a comment down below. How did those experiences influence your comfort level with your children's media choices if you are a parent? Are you trying to create your own positive experiences or avoid your negative ones? And most importantly, when you are feeling the urge to restrict what your children see, are you protecting them from genuine harm, or are you protecting your own assumptions from being questioned? And as these stupid ass culture wars continue, I'm so tired, boss. As these culture wars continue, the most radical act itself might not be choosing the right content for our children, but teaching them to think critically about all content, including the lessons we are trying to pass down, because ultimately the goal isn't raising children who think exactly like us, but raising children who can think for themselves. And I'm sorry if that sounds cheesy, but it's the truth. I don't care if my kids disagree with me, just so long as they aren't going around saying that certain peoples need to not be here. Okay, and that is my video book report on children's media in 90 cartoons, and essentially, in a way, kind of the beginning of the culture wars within children's media, now that I kind of think about it and say this all out loud. So yeah, let me know what you think. This second part was really spawned by that Elmo story, or the Russian Sesame Street story in the beginning. I thought it was very fascinating. There's a book too. If you want to read the book, there's a book. Yeah, and we are also on our way to 10,000 subscribers. Once we get to 50 members between both platforms, I will start doing monthly live streams, and I will probably start doing a lot more Moist Critical style videos where it's, hey guys, so this is what happened on the internet today, and isn't it crazy? Okay, bye. More stuff like that, this when I have the ADHD urge to just get something out there. So that sounds like your jam. Check it all out. Please don't go now. On with the rest of the video. Okay, so yeah, let me know what you think. Let me know what cartoons helped shape your life, and how, if you are a parent or if you are some sort of authoritative figure to a younger generation child, how do you kind of process the stuff that you took in, how it shaped your childhood and your adulthood, and how you're passing that knowledge down? So, aka, if there is something you want me to talk about within this frame, like a video game, a movie, whatever, I have a whole bunch of video games that I want to play, but that's 40 hours a game just playing it and shit. So yeah, let me know what you think. I'm gonna start working on the next video because I really miss doing this stuff, and I'll talk to you guys soon. Okay, bye. Check out the Patreon and the YouTube memberships. I'll do little emojis. I can take my Twitch emojis because I'm an affiliate on Twitch, and I can do those probably on YouTube. And then that way you guys can have emojis of my dogs, my different pets and stuff. That would be fun. So yeah. Also, I'll show you my Lorcana cards later. Okay, bye.